Jake Morrison sat in his captain's chair, watching the stars drift past on the main screen. The Horizon's Edge was 3 months into its mission, exploring the border regions between human space and the Zyphorian Empire. So far, everything had gone smoothly. Too smoothly, Jake often thought. His second officer, Amy Phillips, walked onto the bridge carrying a datapad. She had been with Jake for 5 years now, and he trusted her judgment completely. She looked worried. "Captain, we have a problem," Amy said quietly. "Long-range sensors picked up 3 Zyphorian patrol ships heading our way. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The Zyphorians were not known for their friendly nature. They ruled over dozens of alien species with an iron fist, and they did not appreciate outsiders in their territory. Humanity had only made contact with them 2 years ago, and relations remained tense. "Are we in their space?" Jake asked. Amy shook her head. "No, sir. We're in the neutral zone. We have every right to be here." Jake nodded. "Good. When they arrive, we'll be polite but firm. We're not doing anything wrong." 20 minutes later, the Zyphorian ships appeared on the screen. They were massive vessels, each one twice the size of the Horizon's Edge. Their dark metal hulls seemed to absorb light, making them look like holes in space itself. A communication request came through. Jake straightened his uniform and nodded to Amy. "Open the channel." The screen flickered, and a Zyphorian officer appeared. He was tall, even sitting down, with 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across his face. His chitinous skin gleamed under the harsh lights of his ship. When he spoke, his voice came through the translator as cold and sharp. "Human vessel, you are trespassing in restricted Zyphorian space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Jake kept his voice calm. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Horizon's Edge. We are in neutral territory, not Zyphorian space. Our navigation data confirms this." The Zyphorian's eyes narrowed. "Your data is incorrect. This region was claimed by the Empire 3 weeks ago. You will comply or be fired upon." Jake's mind raced. 3 weeks ago. That information should have reached human command by now. Either the Zyphorians were lying, or someone had failed to update the navigation charts. Either way, Jake was in a bad position. "I was not informed of any territorial changes," Jake said carefully. "If you can provide documentation, we will leave immediately." The Zyphorian officer leaned forward. "Humans do not make demands of the Empire. You will surrender your ship now." Behind Jake, the tactical officer whispered urgently, "Captain, they're charging weapons." Jake made a quick decision. "We will comply. Powering down engines now." Amy turned to him with wide eyes, but Jake gave her a small shake of his head. Fighting 3 Zyphorian warships would be suicide. Better to surrender and sort this out through diplomatic channels. The next few hours were tense. Zyphorian soldiers boarded the Horizon's Edge and searched every deck. They were thorough but not violent. Jake and his crew were confined to the mess hall, under guard. Finally, the Zyphorian officer from the screen came aboard. He walked directly to Jake. "You are Captain Morrison." "I am." The officer pulled out a small device and scanned Jake from head to toe. He seemed satisfied with whatever he found. "You will come with us. Your crew will be detained here until further notice." Jake felt his blood run cold. "Where are you taking me?" "That is not your concern." Amy stepped forward. "You can't just take our captain. We have rights under the Neutral Zone Treaty." The Zyphorian barely glanced at her. "The treaty is irrelevant. Captain Morrison has been summoned by Queen Vexara herself. He should feel honored." The mess hall went silent. Every human there knew who Queen Vexara was. She ruled the Zyphorian Empire with absolute authority. She had ruled for over 300 years, conquering world after world. If she wanted to see Jake personally, it could only mean one thing. Jake was going to die. He tried to keep his face calm, but his hands were shaking. "When do we leave?" "Immediately." Jake turned to Amy. "You're in command until I get back. Follow all orders from the Xiphorians. Don't do anything that might put the crew in danger." Amy's eyes were wet, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." Jake was escorted off his own ship and onto the lead Xiphorian vessel. The interior was cold and dark, lit only by pale blue lights. His guards led him to a small cell and locked him inside. Through the narrow window, he watched the horizon's edge grow smaller as the Xiphorian ship accelerated away. The journey to Zith Prime took 3 days. Jake spent most of that time alone in his cell, with only brief visits from guards who brought him food and water. The food was bland but edible, clearly designed for a variety of alien digestive systems. Jake used the time to think. Why would the Queen summon him personally? If she just wanted him dead, the patrol ships could have destroyed the horizon's edge without warning. If she wanted a hostage, any crew member would do. No, there had to be something specific about Jake that interested her. He thought about recent events. The horizon's edge had visited several human colonies in the past few months. One of them, New Haven, had recently accepted refugees from a species called the Kelthari. The Kelthari had rebelled against Xiphorian rule and lost badly. Thousands of them had fled into human space, begging for protection. Jake had supported the colony governor's decision to grant them asylum. He had even helped several Kelthari families find transport to New Haven. At the time, it had seemed like the right thing to do. Now Jake wondered if that decision had signed his death warrant. On the 3rd day, the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Through his cell window, Jake saw Zith Prime for the first time. It was a massive world, larger than Earth, with 3 small moons. The surface was covered in sprawling cities that glowed with purple and blue light. In orbit, hundreds of warships patrolled in perfect formation. This was where Jake would die. The ship landed at the Imperial Palace, a massive structure of crystal and metal that rose kilometers into the sky. Jake was pulled from his cell and marched through enormous hallways. Everywhere he looked, he saw trophies from conquered worlds. Flags, weapons, works of art, all taken as prizes. Finally, they reached a pair of massive doors. The guards pushed them open, and Jake saw the throne room beyond. It was the size of a football field, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. And at the far end, sitting on a throne of black crystal, was Queen Vexara. She was enormous, twice the height of the guards around her. Her 6 eyes fixed on Jake as he was forced to walk toward her. Her chitinous armor gleamed like polished obsidian. When she spoke, her voice filled the entire room. "Captain Jake Morrison, do you know why you are here?" Jake swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, and his heart was pounding. But he forced himself to stand straight and meet her gaze. "No, Your Majesty, I do not." The Queen leaned forward, and Jake could see rage burning in all 6 of her eyes. "Then let me enlighten you." Queen Vexara rose from her throne, and the movement made Jake take an involuntary step backward. She was terrifying up close, her body covered in sharp angles and hard plates that looked like they could cut through steel. Her 6 eyes blazed with fury as she descended the steps toward him. "You dare to interfere with the internal affairs of my empire," she said, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "You dare to harbor criminals and traitors who fled from justice." Jake's mind raced. So this was about the Kelthari refugees. He had been right. He kept his voice steady, though fear made his knees weak. "Your Majesty, if you're referring to the Kelthari families that human colonies gave shelter to, they were not criminals. They were refugees fleeing persecution." The Queen's eyes narrowed. Around the edges of the throne room, Jake noticed other aliens watching. There were dozens of them, representatives from various species, all dressed in elaborate clothing. They were ambassadors, he realized. The Queen had an audience for whatever she planned to do to him. Persecution? The Queen's voice dripped with contempt. They were rebels who refused to accept imperial law. They attacked Xiphorian officers. They destroyed government property. And when they faced punishment for their crimes, they ran to you like cowards. Jake felt anger mixing with his fear. They were fighting for their freedom. The Kelthari had been independent for thousands of years before your empire conquered them. They just wanted their world back. A murmur went through the assembled ambassadors. Several of them looked shocked that Jake would speak to the Queen this way. The Xiphorian guards around the room tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons. The Queen moved closer to Jake, towering over him. "And what gives you the right to decide these matters, human? Your species has been in space for barely a century. The Xiphorian Empire has existed for 10,000 years. We have brought order to hundreds of worlds. We have ended countless wars. We have created peace through strength." Jake looked up at her, forcing himself not to look away. "Peace? Is that what you call it when people are afraid to speak freely? When they're punished for wanting to govern themselves? That's not peace. That's just silence." The throne room went completely quiet. Even the guards seemed frozen. Jake knew he had probably just guaranteed his death, but he was tired of holding back. If he was going to die anyway, he might as well speak the truth. The Queen's body trembled with rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Before the Empire brought order, these species were constantly at war with each other. They destroyed their own worlds with their conflicts. We saved them from themselves." "By conquering them?" Jake shot back. "By taking away their choice? That's not saving them. That's just replacing one kind of destruction with another." One of the ambassadors, a thin alien with 4 arms, spoke up nervously. "Your Majesty, perhaps the human does not understand our ways. His species is young and naive." The Queen silenced him with a glare. She turned her attention back to Jake. "Tell me, Captain, what gives humans the right to judge the Empire? What makes you think you know better than civilizations that are thousands of years older than yours?" Jake took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment that would decide whether he lived or died. He spoke carefully, choosing each word. "I don't claim that humans know better than anyone else. We've made plenty of mistakes in our own history. We've had wars, we've had oppression, we've done terrible things to each other. But we learned something from all that pain and suffering." "And what is that?" the Queen demanded. "That every thinking being deserves freedom. That no one has the right to rule over others without their consent. That compassion and mercy are not weaknesses, they're strengths." Jake paused, then added quietly, "And that sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing to do." The Queen stared at him for a long moment. Her 6 eyes seemed to bore into his soul. Then she spoke again, her voice still angry, but with something else underneath. Something Jake couldn't quite identify. "So you admit that you helped the Kelthari refugees. You gave them sanctuary, knowing it would anger the Empire. You risked war between our species for the sake of a few thousand rebels." "Yes," Jake said simply. "We couldn't turn them away. They came to us asking for help. They had children with them, families who had lost everything. What were we supposed to do? Send them back to face execution?" "Yes," the Queen roared. "That is exactly what you should have done. They broke our laws. They had to face the consequences." Jake shook his head. "We have laws too, Your Majesty. Human laws say that we have to protect people who are fleeing persecution. We call it asylum. It's one of our most important principles." "Then your principles will destroy you," the Queen said coldly. "The Empire has crushed species far stronger than humanity. We have weapons that could turn your homeworld into ash. We have fleets that outnumber your entire navy 100 to 1. And you dare to defy us over a handful of refugees. Jake felt sweat running down his back, but he kept his voice calm. Yes, because if we abandon our principles out of fear, then we've already lost everything that makes us who we are. I'd rather die standing up for what's right than live by compromising what we believe in. The assembled ambassadors whispered among themselves. Some looked impressed. Others looked like they thought Jake was insane. The Queen stood perfectly still, studying him. "You would die for these beliefs?" she asked softly. "If I have to, yes." "And your crew, your people, you would let them die too?" Jake hesitated. That was the hard question. It was easy to be brave with his own life. But could he risk his crew? Could he risk all of humanity for the sake of principle? The Queen saw his hesitation and pressed harder. "That is the difference between us, Captain. I make the hard choices to protect my empire. I do what is necessary, even when it is difficult. You humans cling to your ideals, but you are not willing to pay the price for them." "That's not true," Jake said, finding his voice again. "We know there's a price. But some things are worth paying for. Freedom is worth it. Justice is worth it. The right to live without fear is worth it." The Queen's eyes blazed brighter. "Noble words. Let us see if you still believe them when your ship is destroyed, when your colonies burn, when your home world begs for mercy." She turned to her guards. "Prepare the execution chamber. This human will die as an example to all who would defy the Empire." The guards moved toward Jake. He felt his heart hammering in his chest, but he stood his ground. At least he had spoken the truth. At least he had not compromised. But then the Queen raised one hand, and the guards stopped. "Wait," she said. Her voice had changed. The rage was still there, but there was something else now. Something that sounded almost like pain. She looked at the ambassadors and other observers. "Leave us, all of you, now." The ambassadors looked confused. They filed out of the throne room quickly, clearly relieved to escape. The guards remained, but the Queen waved them to the far corners of the room, out of earshot. When everyone else was gone or distant enough, the Queen turned back to Jake. Her 6 eyes studied him intently. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You fool. You brave, stupid fool." Jake stared at her, completely confused. The Queen's entire demeanor had changed. The rage was still visible, but now it seemed directed somewhere else. Not at him. "Your Majesty," he said uncertainly. The Queen looked around, making sure no one could hear. Then she said something that made Jake's world turn upside down. "I am not angry at you for defying me, Captain. I am angry because I cannot do what you just did." Jake stared at the Queen, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. The massive alien ruler, who moments ago had been threatening to destroy humanity, now looked almost vulnerable. Her 6 eyes were still fierce, but there was something else there. Something that looked like desperation. "I don't understand," Jake said carefully. The Queen glanced at her guards again, making sure they were far enough away. Then she moved closer to Jake, lowering her voice even more. "Of course you don't understand. No one does. They see the mighty Queen Vexera, ruler of the Empire, conqueror of worlds. They see power and strength. They don't see the cage I live in." Jake's confusion deepened. "What cage? You're the most powerful being in this part of the galaxy." The Queen made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "Power? Yes, I have power, but I am a prisoner of that power, Captain. Every decision I make, every word I speak is watched by the noble houses. They support me because I make them rich and powerful through conquest. If I show weakness, if I show mercy, they will remove me and replace me with someone more brutal." She turned away from him, looking up at the vast ceiling of the throne room. I have ruled for 300 years. Do you know how many worlds I have conquered in that time? 47. Do you know how many species I have enslaved? 23. And do you know how many nights I have slept peacefully? She looked back at Jake, and he saw genuine pain in her eyes. None. Not one. Jake felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. This couldn't be real. The Queen was trying to trick him somehow. But looking at her face, seeing the emotion there, he found himself believing her. Why are you telling me this? He asked. The Queen moved to her throne and sat down heavily, as if exhausted. Because I need help. Because I have been searching for a way to change the Empire without being destroyed myself. And because you humans have done something I never thought possible. What do you mean? You defied me, the Queen said simply. Openly, publicly. You gave sanctuary to the Kelthari, knowing it would anger the Empire. You stood by your principles, even when it put you in danger. And most importantly, you survived. Jake shook his head. I'm not sure I'm going to survive. You just threatened to execute me. The Queen waved a hand dismissively. That was for the ambassadors. They expect me to rage against humans. If I didn't show fury, they would become suspicious. But you are not going to die, Captain. At least, not if you're willing to help me. Help you do what? The Queen leaned forward. Help me reform the Empire. Help me find a way to rule with mercy, instead of terror. Help me give the conquered species their freedom back, without starting a civil war that would kill billions. Jake felt dizzy. This was too much to take in. I'm just a ship captain. How am I supposed to help you reform an empire? The Queen replied, by being exactly what you are. A symbol, an example. You stood up to me and survived. Other species will notice. They will become bolder. And when they do, I will have the excuse I need to negotiate instead of conquer. Jake began to understand. You want humanity to challenge you, to give you a reason to change your policies without looking weak. Yes, the Queen's eyes blazed with something that might have been hope. For years, I have been trying to find ways to slow the Empire's expansion. I arrange for intelligence failures so that rebel groups can escape. I personally oversee prisoner transfers and ensure that conditions are less harsh than they should be. I have even sabotaged military operations to prevent unnecessary deaths. She stood again, pacing across the throne room. But it is not enough. The Empire continues to grow. The suffering continues. And I am powerless to stop it, because I must maintain the appearance of strength. If the noble houses suspect that I am deliberately weakening the Empire, they will kill me and replace me with someone worse. Jake watched her pace, trying to absorb everything. So you need an external threat, something that forces you to negotiate. Exactly. And humanity is perfect for that role. You are new, you are idealistic, and you have already shown that you will not be easily intimidated. If you continue to defy me, I can use that as justification for changing policies. I can say that the old methods are not working, that we need a new approach. Jake thought about it. It made a twisted kind of sense, but it was also incredibly dangerous. What if the noble houses decide to crush humanity before you can stop them? What if your military attacks our colonies? The Queen stopped pacing and looked at him. That is the risk. That is why this plan requires perfect coordination. You must push back against the Empire, but not too hard. You must challenge me publicly, but privately we must work together to ensure things never escalate to actual war. You're asking me to play a very dangerous game. I am asking you to help me save billions of lives, the Queen said quietly. The Empire will not fall overnight. It may take decades, perhaps centuries, to truly reform. But every step toward mercy, every policy that values life over conquest, will save countless beings from suffering. Jake walked over to one of the massive windows and looked out at the city below. Millions of aliens lived down there. going about their lives under the rule of the Empire. How many of them dreamed of freedom, but didn't dare speak it aloud? "Why me?" he asked. "Why not approach human leadership directly? Why a random ship captain?" The Queen came to stand beside him. "Because you are not random. I have been watching humanity for 2 years. I have read reports about your species, your culture, your values, and when I heard about a human captain who personally helped Kelthari refugees escape to safety, I knew I had found the right person." She gestured toward the city. "You have compassion, Captain. You have courage. You are willing to risk yourself for others. These are rare qualities, even among humans. If I approached your political leaders, they would be cautious and calculating. They would see the risks and hesitate. But you have already shown that you will do what is right, regardless of the danger." Jake turned to face her. "You're asking me to trust you, to believe that this isn't some elaborate trap, just as I am trusting you not to reveal what I have told you. If word of this conversation reached the noble houses, I would be executed within days." They stared at each other in silence. Jake thought about his crew, still detained on the horizon's edge. He thought about the human colonies scattered through space, vulnerable to attack. He thought about the Kelthari refugees who had already found safety in human territory. And he thought about the billions of beings living under the Empire's rule, hoping for change. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked finally. The Queen's eyes brightened. "A secret alliance. Publicly we will be enemies. The Empire will condemn human actions, and humanity will defy us. But privately we will coordinate to ensure that conflicts never escalate beyond words. We will create situations that force me to negotiate, giving me the excuse to make concessions. If the noble houses discover the truth, then we will both likely die," the Queen said bluntly. "But if we do nothing, the suffering continues. The Empire will keep expanding, keep conquering, keep enslaving. At least this way, there is hope for change." Jake took a deep breath. This was the biggest decision of his life. He was being asked to essentially commit treason against his own species by making secret agreements with an alien ruler. But he was also being offered a chance to help reform an oppressive empire and save countless lives. "I need to contact my ship," he said. "I need to tell my officers what's happening. I can't make this decision alone." The Queen nodded. "Of course. But choose carefully who you tell. The fewer people who know the truth, the safer we all are." She moved to a console on the wall and pressed several buttons. A screen appeared, showing Amy Phillips' face. She looked shocked to see Jake alive. "Are you all right?" Amy asked. "I'm fine, Amy," Jake said. "Listen carefully. I need you and Craig Bennett to meet me in a secure location. The Queen is providing coordinates. What I'm about to tell you will change everything." Amy looked confused but nodded. "Understood, sir." The screen went dark. The Queen turned back to Jake. "Your officers will be brought here within the hour. In the meantime, we should begin planning. There is much to discuss." Jake nodded slowly. He had come to Zith Prime expecting to die. Instead, he had found something far more unexpected. An enemy who wanted to become an ally. A tyrant who wanted to become a liberator. And a chance to change the galaxy. It was terrifying and exhilarating, all at once. 2 hours later, Amy Phillips and Craig Bennett stood in a private chamber deep within the Imperial Palace. Their faces showed a mixture of shock, disbelief, and growing understanding as Jake explained everything the Queen had told him. Craig, the chief engineer, was the first to speak. He was a practical man who usually dealt with problems he could fix with tools and knowledge. This situation was far beyond his normal expertise. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "The Queen wants us to pretend to be enemies while secretly working together to reform her empire from the inside?" "That's correct," Queen Vexara said. She had joined them in the chamber, her massive form somehow seeming less threatening in the smaller space. "I know it sounds complicated, but it is the only way. Amy looked at Jake. Captain, this is dangerous. If we get caught, it's not just us who suffer. All of humanity could be targeted. That's why I needed you both here. I can't make this decision alone. If either of you thinks this is too risky, we walk away now. Craig rubbed his face with both hands. What happens if we say no? Does the Queen let us go? The Queen nodded. Yes, I will release you with a public warning to stay away from Imperial space. Humanity will remain safe as long as you stop harboring refugees. Life continues as it was. But the Empire keeps conquering worlds, Amy said quietly. The oppression continues. Yes, the Queen said simply. The three humans looked at each other. Jake could see them weighing the options. Finally, Amy spoke. I'm in. This is bigger than us. If there's a chance to help billions of people, we have to try. Craig nodded slowly. I agree, but we need to be smart about this. We need a plan that protects both sides. Jake felt relief wash over him. He hadn't wanted to do this alone. Let's figure out how to make this work. They spent the next several hours planning. The Queen explained the political structure of her empire, identifying which noble houses were the most dangerous, and which ones might be convinced to support reform. She described the military command structure, and which generals could be trusted to follow her orders, even if they disagreed with them. Jake and his officers contributed their knowledge of human politics and military capabilities. They discussed which human colonies were in the best position to provide sanctuary to refugees, and which ones were too vulnerable to take the risk. The plan that emerged was complex, but workable. Human colonies would continue to accept refugees from oppressed species, but they would do so more quietly. The Empire would issue public condemnations of human actions. Over time, these small acts of defiance would accumulate, forcing the Queen to call for negotiations. The key is making it look natural, the Queen explained. If change happens too quickly, the noble houses will become suspicious. We need to make them think that negotiation is my idea, a strategic decision rather than a moral choice. Amy raised a practical concern. How do we communicate? We can't exactly call each other when we need to coordinate. The Queen thought for a moment, then called in one of her personal guards. The guard was different from the others Jake had seen, smaller, quieter, with an almost nervous energy. This is Keeper Zin, the Queen said. He has served my family for generations. He is completely loyal and completely discreet. He will be our messenger. Zin bowed deeply. I am honored to serve in this matter, Your Majesty. Zin will travel between human space and the Empire regularly, the Queen continued. He will pose as a traitor. If either side needs to communicate, give him the message, and he will deliver it securely. Jake studied the small alien. Can we trust him? With your life, the Queen said firmly. Zin's family has kept my secrets for 300 years. He knows more about my true feelings than any of the noble houses. Zin spoke in a soft voice. I have watched Her Majesty suffer under the weight of her crown for many years. If this plan can ease that burden and help the Empire become something better, I will do everything in my power to make it succeed. Craig asked a hard question. What happens when things go wrong? Because something will go wrong. It always does. The Queen's expression grew serious. Then, we improvise. We adapt. And if necessary, we sacrifice. Sacrifice what? Amy asked. Whatever is needed to maintain the deception. If the noble houses become suspicious, I may need to take actions that seem harsh. I may need to threaten humanity more directly. You will need to trust that I am still working toward reform, even when my public actions suggest otherwise. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You're talking about people dying. Human people. The Queen met his gaze steadily. I am talking about the smallest possible sacrifice for the greatest possible good. Do you think I will enjoy it? Do you think it will not haunt me? But if a dozen humans must die to save millions of others, that is a trade I will make." The room fell silent. This was the dark heart of their plan. It required them to accept that some innocent people might be hurt or killed to maintain the deception. It required them to become manipulators, playing with lives like pieces on a game board. Amy spoke softly. "My sister lives on New Haven Colony. If something happens to that colony, if people there die because of this plan, their sacrifice actually made a difference." The Queen moved closer to Amy, looking down at the human woman. "I give you my word. Every life lost in this endeavor will be honored. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. And when the Empire finally reforms, when species are free to govern themselves again, we will build monuments to those who made it possible." Jake made a decision. "We go forward, but we set some ground rules. No attacks on civilian targets. No mass casualties. If violence has to happen, it needs to be limited and controlled." "Agreed," the Queen said. "I have no desire to harm innocents. Everything will be carefully staged to minimize actual casualties." Craig pulled out a datapad. "We need to establish protocols, communication codes, emergency procedures, fallback plans. If we're going to do this, we do it right." They worked through the night, refining their plan. By morning, they had created a framework for their secret alliance. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As dawn broke over Zith Prime, the Queen led them back to the throne room. This time, she summoned the ambassadors and observers back. When they were all assembled, she addressed them in a loud, commanding voice. "I have interrogated the human captain and his officers. They are arrogant and foolish, but they are not worth the effort of destroying. I am releasing them as a gesture of imperial mercy." She turned to Jake. "Tell your people that the Empire will not tolerate further interference. If humanity continues to harbor refugees and defy imperial law, there will be consequences. This is your only warning." Jake bowed slightly, playing his part. "We have heard your message, Your Majesty. But humanity will not abandon those who seek our protection. We will do what we believe is right, regardless of the threats against us." The assembled aliens gasped at Jake's boldness. The Queen's eyes blazed with apparent fury. "Then you seal your own fate, human. When the Empire moves against you, remember that you brought this upon yourselves." "We will remember," Jake said calmly. "And we will not back down." The Queen waved her hand dismissively. "Get them out of my sight. Return them to their ship and send them away." Guards escorted Jake, Amy, and Craig from the throne room. As they walked through the palace corridors, Jake caught Keeper Zinn watching from a shadowed alcove. The small alien gave him the briefest of nods. The plan was in motion. When they returned to the horizon's edge, the crew greeted them with relief and celebration. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, why they were still alive. Jake gave them a carefully edited version of events, explaining that the Queen had issued a warning, but decided humans were not worth the trouble of fighting. Later, alone in his quarters, Jake recorded a message for human command. He explained the situation in vague terms, recommending that humanity continue its policy of accepting refugees, but be prepared for increased Zyphorian hostility. He didn't mention the secret alliance. He couldn't, not yet. As the horizon's edge left Zith Prime and jumped into faster-than-light travel, Jake stood on the bridge and watched the stars. Amy came to stand beside him. "Think we're doing the right thing?" she asked quietly. Jake thought about the billions of beings living under the Empire's rule. He thought about the Kalthari refugees who had found safety in human colonies. He thought about the Queen, trapped by her own power, desperate for change. "I hope so," he said. "I really hope so." 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison's meeting with Queen Vexera. Those 6 months had been the most stressful of his life, filled with constant tension and careful maneuvering. Every decision felt like walking on a knife's edge, knowing that one wrong move could destroy everything. The plan was working, but slowly. Human colonies continued to accept refugees from various species fleeing the Empire. The Cyphorian government issued angry statements and threats, but no military action followed. Other species began to notice the pattern. If the mighty Empire wouldn't attack humanity for openly defying them, maybe the Empire wasn't as invincible as everyone thought. Jake's ship had become a symbol. The horizon's edge traveled the border regions, making its presence known, showing the flag. Wherever they went, they heard whispers of hope. Small resistance movements were growing bolder. Trade routes were shifting as merchants sought to avoid imperial taxes. It was all very gradual, but change was happening. Craig Bennett had become the unofficial coordinator of their secret communications. Keeper Zinn visited human space regularly, posing as a trader selling Zyphorian artifacts. Each time, he brought messages from the Queen and carried replies back. The system worked well, but Jake worried constantly about security. One intercepted message could doom them all. Amy Phillips had taken on the difficult task of screening refugees. Not every alien who showed up at human colonies was genuinely fleeing persecution. Some were spies sent by the Empire to gather intelligence. Amy had developed a network of contacts and informants, people who could verify the refugees' stories. It was delicate work, and it weighed on her. Today, Jake sat in his quarters, reviewing the latest message from Keeper Zinn. The news was not good. Several noble houses had begun questioning the Queen's lack of response to human defiance. They were calling for military action, suggesting that the Queen was showing weakness. The situation was reaching a critical point. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Amy entered, looking tired. She had been working 18-hour days lately, and it showed. "Captain, we have a situation. A Kalthari delegation wants to meet with you. They say it's urgent." Jake set down the message pad. "What do they want?" They wouldn't say, but they seemed scared. 20 minutes later, Jake met with 3 Kalthari in one of the ship's conference rooms. They were small beings, barely 4 feet tall, with large eyes and graceful movements. The leader, a female named Sora, spoke in a quiet, musical voice. "Captain Morrison, we need your help. My people on the colony world of Kelth 7 are planning a major rebellion against the Empire. They believe that if humanity can defy the Zyphorians successfully, so can they." Jake felt his stomach drop. This was exactly what he had feared. When is this rebellion supposed to happen? In 3 weeks. They plan to seize the Imperial garrison and declare independence. They think the Empire won't respond with force because they haven't attacked humanity. Jake exchanged glances with Amy. This was a disaster. The Queen couldn't ignore a full rebellion, not without losing all credibility with the noble houses. But if she crushed the rebellion, it would set back their reform efforts by years. "Does the Queen know about this?" Amy asked. Sora shook her head. "We don't think so. The planning has been very secret. But once it starts, the news will spread quickly." Jake made a decision. "We need to stop this rebellion. It's not the right time. The situation isn't stable enough yet." Sora looked shocked. "But Captain, my people are suffering. They need hope. They need to believe that freedom is possible." Jake said gently, "I understand. But a failed rebellion will make things worse. The Empire will crack down harder. More people will die. We need to be patient and wait for the right moment." "When will that moment come?" Sora asked, her voice breaking. "My people have been waiting for decades. How much longer must they suffer?" Jake had no good answer for that. How do you tell someone to keep enduring oppression when you know relief might still be years away? But he also knew that a premature rebellion would be crushed, and the consequences would be severe. "Give me 3 days," he said finally. "Let me contact some people. Maybe we can find another way." After the Kelthari left, Jake immediately sent an emergency message through Keeper Zin. The Queen wanted to meet, secretly, on a neutral station at the edge of both their territories. 2 days later, Jake and the Queen met in a private docking bay on Station Meridian. The Queen had come alone, except for Keeper Zin, a significant risk that showed how seriously she took the situation. "This rebellion will destroy everything," the Queen said without preamble. "The noble houses are already questioning my leadership. If I allow a full rebellion to succeed, they will remove me. If I crush it brutally, our plan for gradual reform fails." "Can you stop the rebellion without violence?" Jake asked. "Impossible. The Kelthari have already committed. If I send troops and they surrender without fighting, everyone will know it was staged." They stood in silence, both understanding the impossible situation. Finally, Jake spoke. "What if you didn't crush the rebellion completely? What if you let it succeed partially?" The Queen's 6 eyes focused on him. "Explain." "The Kelthari take the garrison. They declare independence. You respond with military force, but not overwhelming force. You take back most of the planet, but you allow them to keep one region. Then you negotiate. You give them limited autonomy in that region as a compromise." The Queen considered this. It would still look like weakness to some, but it would also look like strategic thinking. Partial victory instead of costly total war. Exactly, and it sets a precedent. Other species will see that rebellion can lead to negotiation rather than annihilation. It's a step toward the reform you want. The Queen paced the docking bay. The casualties would still be significant. Thousands would die in the fighting. "Fewer than would die in a total war," Jake said quietly. "And fewer than will die if we do nothing, and the Empire continues as it is." The Queen stopped pacing and looked at him. "You have changed, Captain. 6 months ago, you spoke of ideals and principles. Now you speak of acceptable casualties and strategic compromises." Jake felt the weight of her words. She was right. He had changed. The optimistic ship captain, who believed in simple right and wrong, had been replaced by someone who understood that real change required difficult choices. "Maybe I've learned what you already knew," he said. "That sometimes doing good requires getting your hands dirty. That perfect solutions don't exist in the real world." The Queen moved closer. "Be careful, Jake Morrison. That path leads to becoming what I am. A ruler who makes terrible choices in the name of the greater good. A leader who sacrifices the few to save the many. It is a lonely, painful existence." "Then why do you keep doing it?" Jake asked. "Because someone must. Because if I stop, someone worse will take my place. And because I still have hope that someday the sacrifices will no longer be necessary." They worked out the details of their plan. The Queen would position troops near Kelth 7, but delay their response to the rebellion for 48 hours, giving the Kelthari time to establish control. Then her forces would attack, but with specific targets and limited objectives. After 3 days of fighting, she would call for negotiations. It was brutal calculus, planning out who would live and who would die, but it was the best option they had. The rebellion happened exactly as the Kelthari had planned. They seized the Imperial garrison in a surprise attack, capturing weapons and supplies. For 2 glorious days, they believed they were free. Then the Empire struck back. Xiphorian warships appeared in orbit and began landing troops. The fighting was fierce but controlled. The Queen's generals, following her secret orders, focused on military targets and avoided civilian areas. They pushed the Kelthari back, but didn't pursue them into the mountains. After 3 days, the Queen made a public address. She condemned the rebellion, but acknowledged that the Kelthari had legitimate grievances. She proposed negotiations, offering the rebels autonomy in the northern mountain region in exchange for accepting imperial authority elsewhere. The galaxy watched in shock. Queen Vexara, known for her brutal suppression of resistance, was negotiating. Conservative members of the Empire were outraged. Progressive voices cautiously celebrated. And across hundreds of worlds, oppressed species whispered that maybe, just maybe, change was possible. Jake watched the news reports from his ship. According to official counts, 3,217 beings had died in the fighting. 3,000 lives lost because of a plan he had helped create. Their names and faces haunted his dreams. Amy found him in the observation deck late one night, staring out at the stars. She sat beside him without speaking for a while. "You can't blame yourself for all of them," she said finally. "Why not? I helped plan this. I knew people would die. And how many people will live because of what we're doing? How many future rebellions won't happen because there's now a path to peaceful reform?" Jake shook his head. "That's what the Queen said. The ends justify the means. But where does it stop, Amy? How many deaths are acceptable? How much suffering is okay if it serves the greater good?" "I don't know," Amy admitted. "But I know that doing nothing would have been worse. The Empire would have continued as it was. Millions would have continued suffering. At least now there's hope for change." "Hope," Jake said bitterly. "We're building hope on a foundation of bodies." "Welcome to leadership," Amy said softly. "Welcome to making choices where there are no good options, only less bad ones." They sat together in silence, watching the stars. Out there across vast distances, the Queen was probably having similar thoughts. Two beings from different species, working together to change a galaxy, both carrying the weight of the lives their choices had cost. A week later, Keeper Zin delivered a new message from the Queen. The negotiations with the Kelthari were progressing well. The noble houses had accepted her explanation that compromise was more strategic than endless war. Several other species had sent quiet inquiries about possibly negotiating their own autonomy agreements. The plan was working. The Empire was beginning to change, one small step at a time. But the message also included a personal note from the Queen, written in her own hand. "Captain Morrison, you asked me once why I continue to rule when it causes me such pain. I continue because of moments like this, because seeing even small progress toward a better future makes the suffering worthwhile. The 3,000 who died on Kelth 7 join the millions I have mourned over my reign. I will remember them all, and when the Empire finally becomes what it should be, when species are truly free, their sacrifice will be honored. Until then, we continue. We endure, we hope. Your friend in this dark work, Vexara." Jake read the message several times, then deleted it as protocol required. He stood and looked out at the stars once more. The path ahead was long and would require many more difficult choices. Many more people would suffer before real change came. But they had started something. The Empire was changing, slowly but surely, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could do, make the world a little better, one painful choice at a time, and hope that someday the sacrifices would no longer be necessary. Jake returned to the bridge, ready to continue the work. The horizon's edge jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying its captain toward whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind them, across the galaxy, a queen sat on her throne and dared to dream of an empire built on justice instead of fear. And throughout hundreds of worlds, beings of countless species looked up at the stars and felt something they hadn't felt in generations.